Again, comparing my experience as a Nigerian who lives in Canada right now, I grew up in the 90s in Nigeria, and I will say that a country like Nigeria, as well as several other African countries, they have an attack against protest. Civil protest in the nations are not encouraged. For instance, the 1993 election annulment in Nigeria, and you have the 2010 protest by the Save Nigeria movement, and then you have the 2020 protest against police brutality in Lagos, Nigeria. Each one of those experiences that I talked about, the events ended up in the government unleashing the police or the military on the people. Or in a few cases also you find that the extreme ends of the law are enacted against the people to squash the protest. There is also, alongside that, the sabotage by labor unions. Labor unions in Nigeria, where I grew up, for instance, are known to sabotage protesting that they will receive money bags from the political powers, and that puts an end to the protest. Now, you will think, oh, this is backward because it's an African thing, but I will tell you that the imperial powers actually put some templates like this in place since way back when, before independence in many African nations. For instance, the 1929 protest by the Aba Women's Riot and the Abeokuta Women's Revolt of 1947, each one of those actually was the colonialists of the time unleashing the police on the people to stop the protest. So this is a template that has been in place, and it's not unique to African countries alone, and I will draw an inference and compare that even with Canada now. That will lead me to the fourth point, and the fourth one is, what if the people protest? My knowledge of Canadian politics is growing significantly over the last 10 years now. But I believe that a very recent experience, which is a very controversial topic, and that is the Freedom Convoy, a protest of 2022, captures this point really well. You would remember just about 2 years ago, a protest happened in Ottawa where the truckers protested certain things, which you can check up on the internet why the protest happened. But you find the government invoked the Emergencies Act on the people, which were called the fringe minority, who do not have values that accord with that of the Canadians according to the government. Now, the federal court last year, 2023, determined that the use of the Emergencies Act was actually unlawful and unreasonable by the government. And mind you, Ottawa has spent over $2 million trying to appeal that decision by the federal court of late. But I'll let you be the judge of that. My point here is not to state whether the Freedom Convoy's protest was a legitimate thing or a good thing or not. But if you want any perspective with respect to that, I think I'll recommend the book by Tom Keegan, Eyewitness to Deceit, which was a very good chronicle of that protest in my own opinion. Again, let me compare here with my experience growing up in Nigeria. I will give you the experience in 1995. Ken Saro-Wiwa was executed by the dictator in power at that time. Ken Saro-Wiwa led a non-violent campaign against environmental degradation of land and of water, against the Dutch Shell company of the time, and the government disagreed with that, and that's because of all the corruption that is going on between the companies and the government in power at that time.
We are going to demand our rights peacefully, non-violently, and we shall win.
The government instituted a 3-day prosecution of this case, and in 3 days it was determined that Ken Saro-Wiwa was supposed to be executed. And in fact, they quickly built the gallows on which this man was executed alongside some others who were involved with the protest. Now, I remember seeing that as a kid, and the kind of fear that grips your mind, having seen that, what the government is capable of doing to the people who disagree with them. I think that's, by every stretch of the imagination, a very fearful thing for anyone in the nation to see. The same thing you see with with journalists in the nation, you begin to get scared to even have an unbiased reporting of any event in the nation. And because of that event, actually, Nigeria was suspended from the Commonwealth of Nations for a while. And you can look up that news. This is not a peculiar thing to Nigeria only. There are several African countries where this kind of thing happens. Go to Uganda, Museveni using an iron hand to govern there. You go to South Africa, they have their own. You come to the Sahel region in Africa and even into West Africa among the francophone countries of late also. That's why we've seen the coup d'etats that have happened in the last few years in that part of the world. Now you would think, oh, it's a problem with free speech not being in the constitution, but no. There are clauses for free speech in the constitution of Nigeria and many African countries, and I even beg to say that there is a clause that supports free speech in the Chinese constitution. I don't know about Russia, but I bet it does. Now, it's left to the day-to-day man, the day-to-day activity for everyone to know whether there is indeed a freedom of expression, freedom of speech in those places or not. So now I've compare the experience where the extreme ends of the law can be evoked on the people temporarily, whether in African countries or in Canada, but what it does is that it sends a signal of fear to the minds of the people. I think it's a form of intimidation by political powers, and you cannot undermine that in future protests because everyone remembers that. Canadians remember, for instance, now that the Freedom Convoy ended with the Emergencies Act used against the people. Now, the courts would determine whether that be lawful or not. Now, when a nation experiences that, it sends a signal of fear to the minds of the people.